Wappers, welcome in. We're going to continue today on our third version of Around the World. We're going to talk a little bit more about the foreign invaders who came in to attack all three of our classical empires, the Han Chinese, Gupta India, and Roman empires, while looking a little bit more specifically at the fallout of these empires' collapse. Now, the key point I want to make about the Huns is where they originated from. The Huns were a Central Asian nomadic tribe, and by nomadic, we know what that term means by now, but effectively, they were a mobile civilization. They didn't have roots in just one area. So they first originated, and we looked at that great map today in class, and I'm going to put the map up here. They originated in Central Asia. They swept down off of the Central Asian plains from the Mongolia region, moved down into China, overcame the defensive walls of the Great Wall of China, which had been built up by the Qin Empire and improved by the Han Empire. And the Huns, sacked and attacked many of the great Han cities. Over time, and we're talking like hundreds of years, the Han first began to become under attack around the 200s 200 CE. And over time, the Huns moved from area to area and then, took on different regions there as well. And from China, they went to India, and then from India, they actually went into some parts of Persia before finally laying waste on the Roman Empire and various parts of Europe. And that's where, the infamous Hun, maybe the most famous Hun of all, Attila the Hun, his efforts in attacking various parts of the Roman European Empire have kind of gained him infamy over the years, which is why today the country of Hungary, Hungary, is actually named in honor of these nomadic tribes that really just kind of like moved, from east to west. And the commonality is in all these places they went, they did play a dynamic role in ending the empires, contributing to the end. But this brings me to my point about any point about history, especially the fall of an empire. Empires don't fall for one particular reason. I think we've nailed that point down pretty well the last couple of days in here. So please don't be so short-sighted to think that the Huns were the only reason these three empires fell. The Huns just happened to be the push off the cliff, and I kind of made that point in class. But let's talk more specifically about each empire. So looking at China, what's unique about the fall of China, Chinese civilization didn't collapse outright. Yes, there would be a power vacuum for the next 300 years or so, but then a group known as the Sui, S-U-I, came in and began to rule China in the late 500 CE. So even though the Han had fallen for about 200 plus years, Chinese civilization never quite evaporated. It sort of just didn't have a central ruling power anymore, but Chinese civilization as we know it under the Han would continue to thrive. So that's a unique point about Chinese civilizations falling under the Han. China didn't just disappear off the map. It just simply went through a transition period, and over 200 years or so, eventually a new dynasty would take over China, and the Sui dynasty would be the first dynasty after the fall of the Han. And what they're most known for is, without a doubt, the Grand Canal. It was an elaborate project built by the Sui to connect various cities within China to the sea, and that would eventually get China more involved in long-range ocean trade in the centuries to come. So that was probably the Sui's biggest accomplishment. What's going on down in India? Well, down in India, the Huns came in like they did in China, and when the Huns came in India, they actually integrated themselves into Indian culture. And specifically, they took root in the warrior class, which is one of the highest classes in the Indian caste system. One of the primary consequences of the Huns' invasion in India is that it forced Buddhism to sort of take a step back. Now, we know that Buddhism had become the dominant religion in India under the Mauryan Empire, but during the Gupta reign, Buddhism sort of slowly started to phase out. But as a result of the Han invasions and the fall of the Gupta Empire, Hinduism was restored throughout India. And what that really meant was not only was there a cultural change there with Hinduism on the way out, but it also meant that the caste system would return in a very prominent way to Indian culture. So the Hun invasion, they embedded themselves in a lot of ways into the Indian culture, and that meant a resurgence of the caste system and Hinduism as well. Now, India, like China, went through a power vacuum, and India was sort of left for the taking. But while this sort of period of Indian culture, or I'm sorry, this period of Indian power vacuum occurred, there were some small minor empires like the Chola, for example, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that, who took over South Asia, South India, and linked with Sri Lanka, modern-day Sri Lanka, and other parts. The Chola were very effective in the Indian Ocean trade routes. And then there was a sort of, northern Indian kingdoms as well. So India went through a long period of time where it was not unified. And this long period of time would extend far into the Middle Ages period, the 10s, the 11s, the 1200s, before India would be united not by Hindu rulers, but ultimately by Arab and Muslim rulers who would come into India, Turkish Muslim rulers, I should say, not Arabs. That's my fault. And that would happen in the 1300s. So India is going to go through a long phase, like China, of a power vacuum. But another similarity to China here is that Indian culture is not going to evaporate. It's just going to now sort of go through a different transition point. So Indian culture will still thrive even after the Gupta Empire falls apart. But that leaves Rome, our third classical empire that falls around the same time. Rome, like India and China, was under immense pressure internally, and then eventually it fell apart externally. And the Huns would definitely have a say in the fall of the Roman Empire. But the Romans were also hit extremely hard by other tribes as well, not just the Huns, but you had various Germanic tribes that came pouring in to Rome to attack various cities within the Roman Empire, which again, remember from class today, the Roman Empire had been split by Diocletian, and sort of eventually it really started to pull in two different directions. And these Germanic tribes like the Visigoths, for example, and the Vandals, these are two names that come up a lot, Visigoths and Vandals, and I have a map here that's going to come up. And these tribes just fleeced Rome, the Roman Empire, on both ends, but especially in the West. The point that you want to take away from this fall of Rome is that the western edge of the Roman Empire completely fell apart. Just total annihilation, wiped out, cities destroyed, towns overrun, entire regions were taken over by Germanic tribes. The western end of the Roman Empire fell into absolute chaos. Meanwhile, the eastern side of the Roman Empire, where Constantine had established his capital in Constantinople, the Eastern Empire remained quite firm. And that sets up a really interesting story arc for the old Roman Empire. Rome, as we know it, is going to completely, and I mean completely, fall apart. Unlike China and India, where there were still some vestiges of their civilizations remaining intact, not so much with Rome. Rome just fell completely under outsiders' control, except for in the East. And so that's one of the most important differences between these three regions, is that the Roman Empire will effectively fall apart. And with that, so too will their culture. Western Europe is going to fall into a very, very, very long, dark ages period where culture is going to be almost next to nothing. And that's going to leave it very vulnerable to different groups to come in and rule. Meanwhile, in the eastern side of the old Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire will rise out of the ashes of the old Roman Empire and really solidify an important role in keeping Hellenistic culture alive within the eastern side of the Roman Empire. So the takeaway here about Rome is really how much that split that occurred truly affects Rome's history, in the sense that that split would leave one half completely gone, completely annihilated, that being the western half, but the eastern half just somehow maintained order, and that was thanks to the strong leadership by emperors like Justinian, who became one of the great Byzantine Empire emperors. And the Byzantines would rise to become a formidable power in Eastern Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East until the arrival of Islam. So Rome will completely fall apart, and that is a distinguishing point between Rome, China, and India, and probably the most important difference that you could contextualize. So, again, where we're at here is this classical era is effectively coming to an end. We're now going to really start transitioning towards religion, looking at how religion shaped a lot of these empires that we've been talking about, but also empires in the future. So it's not like we're going to ignore these classical empires now for the rest of the year, but we are starting to transition now into a point where we're focusing on different aspects. And what I would just again remind you is to take away from this conversation the last couple of days is just how important it is in your ability to explain. Don't just think of this whole series of conversations as listing out information. It's about explaining why these differences matter, how the Roman Empire split, changed and shaped its future. These are the foundational points we're going to really look to utilize here to make sure that when we get into essay writing, which will be very soon, we'll be in good places to go. So I'm going to leave you with that for today. It was a pretty short recap of that article, but I just want to make sure we have these things down. So I'll leave you guys with that. And as always, the past shapes the future. Take care, Whappers. All right, before you guys head out tonight, just a little quick reminder about how fun tutoring can be. We had a lot of students here today, and they want to say a quick hello. There goes my crown, dude.